His eyes widened. He didn't immediately understand what was happening. At that moment, all his self-confidence disappeared, replaced by confusion. "Rebecca?" He grabbed her by the shoulders, but she recoiled. Now her body was convulsing. He looked at her, and then his gaze shifted to the cup. I saw his face pale, and then a horrifying realization flashed in it. His hand trembled as he touched the cup. He understood. The cup was not the right one. I slowly came out of the room, holding the phone in my hand, ready for anything. "What did you put in the coffee, Tom?" My voice was steady, but there was steel in it. Tom shuddered, his breath caught. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. He knew I wasn't asking just like that. I already knew the answer. "It's—" He swallowed, his gaze darting between me and Rebecca, who was now gasping for air. You weren't supposed to switch the cups," he blurted out in panic. I stepped closer, holding the phone so he could see I was recording everything. "So you admit there was something in that cup?" My words hung in the air. He wanted to say something but froze, his mouth half open, but the words wouldn't come. At that moment, Rebecca understood everything. She looked at me, then at Tom, and in her eyes shone real animal fear. "Sarah!" Her voice was hoarse, weak. "Call an ambulance, please." Her fingers slipped off the table, and she collapsed to the floor. Rebecca collapsed to the floor. Her body convulsed as if waves of invisible pain were rolling through her. Her lips turned gray, and a soft, hoarse moan escaped her mouth. I saw her fingers scratching the wooden floor, clinging to it as if it could stop what was happening in her body. Tom rushed to her, his hands trembling, trying to hold her head so she wouldn't hit it. "Damn it!" His voice was choked, full of panic. "Sarah, call an ambulance." I took out my phone but didn't dial the number right away. I looked at Tom. His face was contorted with horror, but not just because of Rebecca's condition. He realized that everything was falling apart before his eyes. I dialed 9, then 1, then 1 again. "Emergency services. What's your emergency?" A calm dispatcher's voice sounded. I took a deep breath. "We need an ambulance urgently at 1542 Maple Grove Drive. A woman is in critical condition. Possible poisoning?" My voice sounded clear, though inside me everything was shaking. "Is she conscious?" the dispatcher asked. I looked at Rebecca. She was conscious, but her eyes were wandering as if her mind was already leaving her. "Still is, but she's losing it," I replied. The dispatcher said the team was already on its way, but I wasn't listening. I was looking at Tom. He was whiter than paper, his lips moving, but he couldn't find the words. "You knew there was something in the coffee," I whispered. "Admit it." He looked at me almost pleadingly, but I didn't look away. I froze. At that moment, everything fell into place. I remembered that evening when I first felt strange after the tea Rebecca made. The taste was slightly bitter, but I didn't pay attention to it. Then it passed quickly. Then there was the cocktail at the party, dizziness, nausea. Tom said then that it was just overexertion after a long day. But the worst was the incident 2 weeks before that. I remember having dinner with them and then waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat with terrible cramps. The doctor said it could have been a random food poisoning. Tom was there. He held my hand. How could he hold my hand and know it was his doing? I looked at him with new clarity. This was not an accident. This was a system. Now everything became obvious. I worked at a large marketing company and had just won a contract that Rebecca wanted for herself. I remembered how she pretended to support me, but there was always hidden anger in her voice. She knew that if I was in the game, she had no chance. But she didn't act alone. Tom was always there. He helped her. He always knew when I had important presentations. It was on those days that I felt the worst. They didn't just try to weaken me. They wanted me out of the game. I raised my head. My hand slowly clenched the phone. I was no longer a victim. "Tom," I said, approaching, "how many times did you look me in the eye and lie?" He didn't answer. I turned on the recording on my phone. I had evidence. "You knew there was something in that coffee, right?" I asked. Tom swallowed. He didn't know what to say. The sound of ambulance sirens broke the night's silence. Rebecca took another breath. Her lips trembled, but she managed to whisper, "Sarah." I looked down at her. "How does it feel to be on the other side of the game?" I whispered. At that moment, the door burst open and paramedics rushed in. Ambulance sirens filled the street with a piercing wail. The door of the house swung open and paramedics rushed in. Their movements were practiced, professional, but even they couldn't hide their momentary bewilderment at seeing Rebecca writhing on the floor. "Did she drink something?" one of the paramedics asked, glancing at me quickly. I nodded. "Coffee. I think there was something in it." My voice was steady, almost detached. I saw Tom clench his fists, but he said nothing. The paramedics lifted Rebecca, securing her on a stretcher. Her lips trembled, her skin was deathly pale. She looked at me. Her usual cold gaze was gone. Only fear remained. "Sarah?" Her voice was weak, but I didn't let her finish. "Take care of yourself, Rebecca," I said calmly. "Now you've gotten yourself into this." As they took her away, one of the paramedics turned to me. "We'll take her to the hospital. If this was poisoning, toxicology tests will confirm it." I nodded. I already knew what they would confirm. The house seemed unusually quiet, despite the noise of the ambulance outside. Tom remained standing in the center of the room, his shoulders tense, his eyes darting from side to side. I calmly took out my phone and opened the gallery. Videos, audio recordings, screenshots of messages, everything I had collected over the past few months. The door opened again. This time it wasn't paramedics, but the police. "Miss Miller." A tall detective in plain clothes entered first, followed by two officers. His gaze swept the room, lingering on Tom. He immediately understood who the criminal was and who the victim was. I stepped forward and handed the phone to the detective. "Everything is here," I said. "Their correspondence, conversations I managed to record. Everything you need to understand that this was not an accident, but a conspiracy." He silently took the phone, quickly flipped through the files, then looked at me with professional interest. "You've prepared well," he said. "We'll need an official statement." I smiled. "It's already with you in these recordings. Now it's your turn to figure this out." Tom was silent, but I saw his self-confidence fading with each passing second. The police were already here. The evidence had been handed over. Rebecca was in the hospital, but if she survived, she too would face arrest. The officers approached him, but he didn't try to run, didn't protest. Instead, he slumped into a chair, looking like a man who realized he had lost. "This," his voice broke. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." "But it did." The detective sat down opposite, interlocking his fingers. "Maybe you can tell us what exactly wasn't supposed to happen." Tom ran a hand over his face as if hoping to wipe away reality along with the cold sweat on his forehead. I saw him hesitate. "It was Rebecca's idea," he finally mumbled. She thought if Sarah got sick, she wouldn't be able to run the company. Thought if she was considered unreliable, she'd be removed." He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not remorse, but fear. "She said it would be easy, just a mild drug. Nothing serious." I smirked, a weak attempt to defend himself. "But you still continued," I said. "You helped her. You did it knowingly." He closed his eyes and exhaled heavily. "Yes." The detective nodded to the officers. One of them took out handcuffs. "Thomas Miller, you are under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy to cause harm. You have the right to remain silent." The dull click of handcuffs echoed through the room. I watched as Tom bowed his head while his hands were cuffed with cold metal. He didn't even resist. "You won't get away with this," he muttered, but his voice sounded hollow. I stepped closer, leaned in, and quietly said, "You already haven't." The detective led him to the exit. I watched him go, but felt nothing. No anger, no relief. Just a cold realization that it was finally over. The police took Tom away, and soon a message came from the hospital. Rebecca was also in custody. At that moment, I took my first real, deep breath in a long time. I survived. But most importantly, I won. The courtroom was packed. News cameras, reporters with notepads, lawyers, investigators. Everyone watched as the final act of this drama approached its conclusion. I sat in the front row, maintaining an inscrutable expression, but inside me a storm of emotions raged. Rebecca looked haggard, her usually polished image ruined, dark circles under her eyes making her look older. Tom sat next to her, his posture slumped, avoiding my gaze. They were no longer the confident people who had plotted against me. The judge opened the case. The defendants, Thomas Miller and Rebecca Harris, are found guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy, and intentional infliction of bodily harm. Given the premeditation and cynicism of their actions, the court sentences, I held my breath. Thomas Miller to 10 years in prison and Rebecca Harris to 12 years in prison. The courtroom gasped. I heard Rebecca's sharp intake of breath. Tom closed his eyes, clenching his fists. They hadn't thought it would go this far. I didn't smile, didn't sigh with relief. I just watched as they were led away in handcuffs. This was what they deserved. A few weeks later, I stood in the main conference room of our company, now my company. The board of directors had offered me the position of executive director, vacant after Rebecca's departure. It seemed like a logical decision. After everything that had happened, I had shown myself not only as a strong professional, but also as someone capable of standing up even to the dirtiest intrigues. Congratulations, Miss Miller, said the chairman of the board, shaking my hand. You've shown us that you deserve to lead this company. I looked up and looked at the people around me. Those who had once doubted me now saw a leader in me. Sitting in the chair where Rebecca once sat, I remembered all the moments of humiliation, manipulation, and attempts to break me. But now it no longer mattered. I had won. Several months passed. Life went on. I sat in my new office, looking at the horizon of the big city. All this time, I thought about how, if I hadn't listened to my instincts, if I hadn't felt the warning signs, everything could have been different. I could have been in Rebecca's place, a victim of intrigue, destroyed by someone else's greed. But I didn't let it happen. I took a cup of coffee. Now I knew it was safe. I took a sip and felt the warm bitterness spread across my tongue. Success. The best revenge is success, and I had achieved it in full.